Good evening. As we wait for people to connect, I want to thank you for joining us for a discussion on the October 8th film that examines the explosion of anti-Semitism on college campuses and in America. I'm Brian Abrahams. I'm the Vice President and Chief Advancement Officer for Democratic Majority for Israel. On behalf of our entire staff, our board and board co-chairs, Ann Lewis and Todd Richmond, welcome. In just a minute, I'll turn it over to Todd to introduce our guests, but first I want to go over a few items. Please consider checking us out on social media. We're on Twitter, X, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, LinkedIn, and now on Blue Sky. You should sign up for our news and updates on our website, dmfa.org. If you want to ask a question, submit it through the Q&A feature on your Zoom interface. So we'll be taking questions from the audience to use in the webinar. And if you're watching on Facebook, you can enter it in the comments section. Now I'm very pleased to turn it over to Todd Richmond.
Brian, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I am really honored tonight to introduce two of dear friends of mine, Congressman Ritchie Torres as well as Wendy Sachs. Both for quite some time. Wendy I've known for her husband Mike, or some of mine and my wife's best friends. But I'm going to do a quick intro of our two guests this morning. Richie Torres, who I've had the pleasure of knowing since he has been in the New York City Council, has represented the 15th District of New York in Congress since 2021, and was the youngest elected official to serve on the New York City Council. He made history as the first gay Afro-Latino person elected to Congress, and for his unwavering commitment to fighting anti-Semitism and supporting Israel's security, Congressman Torres was awarded the Jewish Federation of North America's Courageous Leadership Award in 2024. DMFI's separate sister organization, DMFI PAC, has proudly supported Representative Torres since his first congressional primary, and I hope you'll join me when he appears today. Back, Congressman Ritchie Torres. He is in a committee meeting right now, but we are working as quickly as possible to get him to appear shortly. I'm also really honored to introduce Wendy Sachs. Wendy is a documentary film director, Emmy Award winning network television producer, writer, author, speaker, amazing mom, great wife, great friend, and most recently, Wendy was the director and executive producer of the really important documentary October 8th that talks about the explosion of anti-Semitism on college campuses after October 7th, 2023. Before this, Wendy co-directed and produced Surge, a documentary on the record number of women flipping red districts to blue districts in the 2018 midterm elections. In addition to numerous other media projects, Wendy has worked on Capitol Hill as a press secretary. We are so grateful to have her today to discuss her newest documentary, October 8th. And I would be remiss to say, but I was with Wendy on October 7th. And I was with Wendy on October 8th. And to really see and feel the pain that she had, and the drive to really educate the world on what was happening the day after October 7th was an extremely meaningful experience for me to see. And we're just so fortunate to have you here today, Wendy. So I'm going to turn over to Brian and you, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Thanks, Todd. So first, Wendy, congratulations on the film. Remarkable achievement, and I think I'm going to learn, and we're all going to learn what you're up against making it. But begin at the beginning, as I guess Todd was with you. Why did you decide to make the film in the first place?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you guys. This feels like being with friends and family here, and everything you're doing with DMFI. I am in awe of what you've created over these years. Listen, on October 7th, I was at the University of Wisconsin. I was visiting my daughter, Lexi. It was game day, and it was Parents' Weekend, and we woke up to the news coming out of Israel and the images coming out of southern Israel of babies and children and young people from the Nova Festival and grandparents being murdered and being kidnapped into Gaza, and those murders and that kidnapping being live streamed on people's Facebook feeds and on Telegram. And we also, we have the Rocket Alert apps on our phone, and we just saw like it blowing up, that Israel was being bombarded. And I think those images first that we all saw on October 7th, they were so gutting and they were so harrowing, and we were trying to understand what was going on, and it felt really epic. And we were unsure actually about how terrible it was, but it felt very different than any other attack that we've seen in Israel. But for me, it really was on October 8th, and seeing what was happening in Times Square when Hamas was being celebrated as freedom fighters rather than being condemned as terrorists. And then hearing what was going on at Harvard, where there were more than 30 student groups signing on to a letter blaming Israel for the attack on itself. And it was, campus after campus after campus. And actually at the University of Wisconsin, Michael and I, my husband, we didn't leave actually until Monday. And so on Sunday, or maybe we left on Monday night, we attended a vigil that was happening at the campus. And there's a strong Jewish population at the University of Wisconsin, and everyone was coming. My daughter in the apartment building where she lives, it felt like the entire apartment building came out for the vigil. But at the same time, there was already a counter protest happening at the University of Wisconsin. But really, it was like in the following days and the following weeks where it was the hostility as if Israel had it coming, that the world felt that they couldn't actually condemn what the horrors that were coming out of Israel, that we were learning about, the rapes and the mutilations and the burning of children. And it was, like unbelievable. It felt like a dystopia. But it was also the silence coming from women's rights organizations and social justice organizations in Hollywood, and in my own professional and personal networks, where people who are very high profile speak out on all of the issues, all the other social injustices. We had just gone a few years earlier through, 2020 and George Floyd. And my groups of people in my social and professional networks, who are in media and technology and entertainment, they're very vocal. But when suddenly we're talking about Jewish girls and Jewish women or anything coming out of Israel, there's silence or there's hate. And I felt as if, like, honestly, it was like a generational trauma unleashed in that moment. And I started writing a treatment for the film within 2 weeks of October 7th. I knew, like, I felt like I was the person to tell this story. I have enough of a foundation to understand sort of what's going on. To me, it was like the perfect storm. It's this Venn diagram that had been percolating for decades of a media bias, and a bias coming from NGOs like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, and then social media and the propaganda war that we're seeing on social media. And I just have had experience in all of these various spaces. I'd actually just done a documentary a couple of years earlier for CNN all about Facebook and all about, algorithms and all about controlling and manipulation and foreign actors weighing in. So I already had a foundation going into this. And I happen to know sort of a lot about Israel and a lot about the bias that we've been seeing in the media. And now, sort of everything I'd been seeing and hearing for a long time just exploded on October 8th. And I got to work. And, as a lot of people know, anyone who listened to the Dan Sunor podcast, which probably a lot of people who are tuning in tonight have listened to that, I sort of had this wild journey getting this made, and a lot of headwinds coming to me from Hollywood that are not necessarily friendly to this type of a film.
So thank you. So expand on that a little bit. You created a treatment, and then what was the next stage, and what was the reception it got?
So I wrote a treatment. It was, end of October, and I had just come off of, after I'd worked on that film Surge, which was an independent film. I thought I was never going to do this again. This independent film route is a terrible business model, and I'm only going to get hired by production companies to make films. And so I did. I was hired by CNN and by NBC News Studios and some others. And so I took my treatment to those production companies and said, okay, here's a story. This is what's happening. Let's go. And no one wanted to work on it. And it was made very clear, like, this is too political. It's to Israel. It's to, has a pro-Israel sympathetic point of view. We're not going to touch it. So I thought, okay, well, here I go. And I'm going to just start raising money for the film and start reaching out to book people. And the very first person I reached out to book was Congressman Ritchie Torres. He was my number one get. At the end of October, early November, I started reaching out to him because I saw what he was doing, watching him on social media and watching him in the news. He was just unapologetic, standing up for Israel and calling out the bias and the double standards and, looking for the moral clarity. Like, where is the world? Where is Congress? Where is everyone? And so he was the very first person I booked for the film. And the first shoot that I did was on November 14th. I drove down to Washington, D.C., and I filmed the Israel rally. And I pretty much announced to everyone, I'm making a film. And, what's interesting, though, is that original treatment is almost what the film became. I didn't really veer off of that course. There was a few elements that I dropped, but ultimately, if I look at that original deck that I passed around and I shared with everyone, it's pretty much the film that you see.
Amazing. So you were both, I'm sure this happens in documentary world, but you were both making a film in real time with real time events, but having to raise money to make it viable. Talk a little bit about that.
That's right. I didn't take any investment money for the film. It was a totally donor-funded project. My last film, I took some investment money. There's not a lot of ROI generally on documentary films. And this just felt like, this will be donor-funded. I'll run it through a fiscal sponsor, so it's all tax deductible, which I did. I had a Jewish organization as my fiscal sponsor. I've now since filed my own paperwork for my own foundation, the October 8th Foundation. But that's what I did. It was very interesting. I would say 80% of the people who donated to the project had never written a check for a film before. But I think after October 7th, people in the Jewish community were so just distraught, just so destroyed by what had happened. And when word got out and I would meet people just over a Zoom or a phone call, people decided to donate to the project. And I'll be honest, I felt the weight of the world. I truly felt a tremendous level of responsibility to get this film right. And everyone wanted to know, well, where is it going to be distributed? How are you going to see this? Who's going to watch this? How are you going to get this done? And I promised everyone that we would have a finished film by October 7th, 2024, and we did. And it became Academy Award eligible, and we had an Academy Award campaign. So it just, I think, superseded people's expectations of what, I could pull off. But I was like messianic almost in my mission to make this and had such a strong vision for what it was going to be. And to be honest, it was very liberating to having not working with a production company or a network to tell me what I can and cannot do. I just blocked out all of the noise. I mean, all of the naysayers all along said, I'm not going to find a distribution company. No one's going to see this. No one's going to buy it. It's too political, even though the film's not political. People like to sort of put it in a box. But I had all the freedom in the world just to make the film I wanted to make and to tell the stories I wanted to tell. And we've seen a tremendous reaction to it.
I experienced it personally. So when was your first trip to Israel to film for this?
So my first trip was in January of 2024, in the middle of January, early to mid-January. It was, I was there for 9 days. I shot like 25 interviews. I hired an Israeli production team to take me around, to take me down to the kibbutzim, to help line up interviews for me. A lot of those interviews didn't make it into the film. I was doing a whole bunch of different things where I was talking to victims and survivors and family members of hostages, some other big names in the sort of journalist Israel community, like people like Haviv Rediger, who is amazing, but ultimately didn't make it into the film. But one of the most transformative sort of experiences for me in Israel, first of all, when I went in January, it just felt like I was broken. The country was broken. It was raining a lot. It was January. It was, relatively chilly for Tel Aviv and for Israel. But I stayed in Tel Aviv for 9 days. And I was staying in a hotel that was taken over by one of the kibbutzim, because all of these displacers, hundreds of thousands of people who were displaced. I don't want to misquote the actual number, but it was something like 150,000, I think, Israelis who were misplaced. And I don't know how many from the South, but the people from the South who were in Tel Aviv. And what was bizarre is I don't speak any Hebrew, not a word of Hebrew. And I've been to Israel 13 or 14 times. And whenever you're in Israel, particularly you're in Tel Aviv, you hear English wherever you go. Everyone's speaking English. There are so many Americans. There's so many, there's just so many people who are speaking English. I literally heard not one word of English in those 9 days. It was bizarre. But what was happening was wherever I went, whether it was to get my coffee in the morning and I was talking to the barista or to the hotel manager or to my cab driver, everyone was thanking me for being there, that I had showed up and that I was documenting what had happened. I think Israelis felt so incredibly abandoned in January in those early months, and I would argue probably still do. But certainly in those first, 6 to 9 months, they just people would hug me and thank me for being there. And this is in the early months of me putting together a film. But one of the most, incredible experiences I had was when I went down and I was touring the kibbutzim, and I didn't want to do what I would call the death tours, sort of like what Sheryl Sandberg did a little bit with her film. And I didn't want to just go around Nir Oz and go around Be'eri and go around Kfar Aza and just be like, in this house, these people died and this terrible thing happened and this terrible thing happened, which is what was happening. People were sort of touring people around. But the Israeli production manager who was working with me said, you need to interview this woman, Irit Lahav. She's incredible. She's, one of the main community people from Nir Oz. You have to talk to her. And I did. I sort of reluctantly sat her down for an interview. And she starts going through minute by minute the unfolding of the early hours of October 7th. And she's talking about these text messages that are happening in her community. And I said, can you get out your phone? Do you still have those text messages? And she said, I do. I said, can you read them to me? And she starts reading me these text messages, 6:31 p.m. or 6:31 a.m., 6:35, 7 a.m. And it's so raw. And she's talking about, they got Gotti, they've kidnapped someone, they've murdered someone. And she's going through this minute by minute. And as soon as we were done with that interview and I was back in the production van, I said, I have the open for my film. I just knew it, and I knew then that I wanted to make the connection between what was happening in Israel and the survivors, the people who were living through the assault, and what was happening in America, and knowing that I wanted to move back and forth because I'm an American Jew. I'm not an Israeli. And I couldn't hijack the Israeli experience, but I could tell the story of the American diaspora Jewish experience on October 7th. But I wanted to connect the two. And so I knew we were going to weave back and forth. And that was the open for the film.
So I want to get back to the distribution and the Oscars in a second, but just reflect for me personally. You had film from the Nova massacre site. What was it like personally going to that site for you?
So that actually I did on my second trip to Israel. That was in June. So that was 6 months later. I came back because I needed to do some pickup interviews and to get some additional B-roll. And actually, I hadn't shot at the Nova site my first trip because they had said to me, do you want to stop here? And I said, no, I'm not covering Nova. I know that there are other filmmakers doing this like Nova Festival documentary. I'm doing something very different. And for whatever reason, I was just decided I didn't need to see it then. I don't really know why. But then I realized I obviously need to go to the Nova site. And on my second trip back, I went. But the craziest thing happened. I had been already interviewing Talia Khan, the student from MIT, who's like one of the rock stars in the film. She's a graduate student. She's half Muslim. She's half Jewish. Her mother's Jewish. Her father's Muslim. She tells this incredible story. And I land in Israel early June. It's, I'm on one of those early flights in the morning. I can't check into my hotel room yet. My hotel's on the beach near the Tel Aviv promenade, 9 o'clock in the morning. So I decided to take a walk on the promenade. I'm taking a walk. About 10 minutes into my walk, no one's out yet. It's completely empty. And I walk right into Talia Khan. the student who I'd filmed with in Cambridge, at MIT, also in New York. So 2 times I've filmed with her. And I'm saying, what are you doing here, Talia? And she said, well, I'm actually here because I've been invited by the government they're talking about anti-Semitism on college campuses, and I'm here for the week. And I said, what are you doing on Thursday? Because on Thursday, I'm going down to the Nova site, and it would be really amazing if you came down with me. And she said, sure, I'll come. And that moment became like this very beautiful scene in the film where she's walking through the Nova site and we're seeing it through her eyes because she can really identify with those young women who were murdered at the Nova Festival. And it became a beautiful scene. And again, to sort of connect us back, here's an American student who I'd interviewed, and here she is in Israel, and we're making the connection. Really sort of brought the whole story full circle. So it was very powerful for me personally, and also artistically. It fit really it made a really beautiful scene in our film that we cut down. At one point, I think it was 10 minutes long, and we cut it down to 3 minutes.
So you produced this amazing film. Distributors must have been clamoring to distribute it.
You would think, right? Right? Everyone would want this because it's so extraordinary, and everyone needs to watch this. No, that is not the case. Hollywood is allergic to films that have I don't even want to call it pro-Israel. It's not a pro-Israel. It's just, I want to call it just sympathetic to the Israeli experience of being massacred by Hamas terrorists. Like, for whatever reason, they can't, they don't want to grapple with that. I point to the Dara Horn book of, people love dead Jews. So people love, you could talk about Holocaust stories, and those stories can win the Academy Award, as we saw. But you can't talk about, Jews living today and getting killed, because no one wants to hear about that. And the real sort of pariah states out there is Israel. And even with those tropes that Jews run Hollywood, what's sort of unbelievable in the elephant in the room is that the Jewish community within Hollywood doesn't want to show up and stand up for anything that that feels like it's supportive of Israel or that feels too Jewish. You can be Jewish like Adam Sandler is Jewish by making fun. You could be Jewish, in that kind of a way, or you could be Jewish like in a Steven Spielberg Shoah kind of way, Schindler's List, but not in a anything that can be interpreted as, anti-Muslim or Islamophobic, or God forbid racist, because you're saying that, the Palestinians in Hamas are terrorists. That is something that is like, a line that can't be crossed. And what I was hearing a lot from people in Hollywood who were seeing early cuts of the film. They knew everyone involved in the film, and they were saying, like, this is amazing. This is really important work. I am so glad you're making it. But sorry, can't touch it, can't represent it. I can try to help you on the side, but can't really do very much. And the other thing I kept hearing was, it's not going to make any money. This isn't commercial. We can't touch it because we're not going to make any money from it. Ultimately, of course, the story is we wound up getting distribution because I had a fairy godfather who dropped in from the heavens, someone who was very influential in Hollywood and wanted to be anonymous at first, but then really, is much more out there now. And he used his weight in the industry and shopped the film around to find a home for it. And the film crossed the $1.3 million mark at the box office. We were screened on 137 screens across the country on AMC, with AMC and with Regal. We're in Canada now. We're getting global distribution. There is an audience for this film. The film is making money, and it's not political, and we're not litigating the war.
So we're going to have Congressman Torres with us in just a couple minutes. I might ask him more questions when he comes, but you mentioned him before you submitted the film for Oscar consideration. What happened?
Well, it might not be a surprise to you, Brian, but the Academy is not very friendly to films like mine. But there is a process that you go through. I had never done an Academy Award campaign. I mean, I had thought, who has the audacity to even do something like that? I didn't expect to be a contender. But I did get, after we screened for our premiere at CAA at the end of October, people said, this is the best documentary I've ever seen. Like some people were saying, like this, like literally old time Hollywood industry people were saying, this may be the best documentary I've seen, at least in the past 20 years. You should really do a campaign, an Academy campaign. And I said, okay, let's go for it. And we were scrambling and it was sort of last minute, but there's a process that you go through. And you don't just like blast out emails to, Academy members. There's an infrastructure in place. And here's how it goes. So the Academy documentary branch voters are the ones who vote for documentaries. There are 700 of them. About 350 of those people are abroad. The whole sort of Academy has changed in the past 5 years. It's become much more diverse as far as who the voters are. About half of those 700 people are abroad in Europe and elsewhere, mostly in Europe, and they vote on your documentary. To get them to know about your film, you do these email blasts, and these email blasts go through an organization called the IDA. That's the International Documentary Association. So we are signed up, we're paying our fee to send out our email blasts, and we're told the morning before we're supposed to actually send out our first batch, oh, sorry, there's no room in our schedule for your campaign, for your email campaign. Sorry, we can't work with you. And being a little naive and having never done this before, I thought, oh, we must have screwed something up. We did not screw anything up. What we found out pretty soon after was that not only were they not working with us, they were also not working with the film We Will Dance Again, the film about the Nova Festival. They were already midway into their campaign when suddenly their campaign was shut down. So the independent film community is not very friendly to anything, again, that's sympathetic to Israel. Not only did we have an issue with the IDA, we were shut out of all the big film festivals that we applied to, just completely shut out. And I heard later from one of the curators at a film festival, your film deserved to make it in. This is a political, ideological reason that it did not make it in. And it was like one festival after another after another.
It's terrible, terrible. Thank you very much. We've been joined by Congressman Torres, so I want to grab onto him while I have the opportunity. Congressman Torres, thank you so much for joining us. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people on this watching. If this was a packed room full of people, you would be getting a sustained standing ovation right now. I just want you to know that. The love for you out there in the community and the appreciation for your support for Israel and your allyship is just immense. So let me start there. How did you become such an ally? Where did your feelings for Israel grow from?
I might be popular because the bar is so low, but I appreciate the kind words. I mean, I've been traveling to Israel for about a decade. The first time I ever traveled to Israel was in February 2015, so I'm celebrating my 10-year anniversary as a proud Zionist. But when I went to Israel for the first time 10 years ago, when you experience both the majesty and the complexity of a place like Israel, it's both formative and transformative. When I went to the Old City and Yad Vashem and the Masada and the Gaza envelope, and I vividly remember a conversation that I had with the local mayor of Sderot, who said to me that the majority of his children struggle with post-traumatic stress because families like his live under the threat of relentless rocket fire. And I remember seeing bus stops doubling as bomb shelters. And I thought to myself, imagine the sheer trauma of an Israeli child seeking refuge in a bomb shelter while sirens are going off and rockets are being fired and adults are panicking. And I was born and raised in the Bronx. It's a rough area. I have family and friends who live in fear of bullets, but none of my constituents or no one anywhere in America lives in fear of rockets. None of us worry that Mexico and Canada are going to fire rockets into American homes and communities. And so my experience of Israel 10 years ago enabled me to have a real empathy, not only for the plight of the Jewish people, but also the complex security situation that Israel faces. And then beyond that, I just feel, speaking out against anti-Semitism is the morally right thing to do. People often ask me, Richie, you're Black, you're gay, you're Latino, you're not Jewish. You may be Jewish, but you're not Jewish. what compels you to speak out so forcefully and frequently against anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism? And I tend to turn the question on them. I said, the question is not why have I chosen to speak out? The question is why have others chosen to be silent amid the deadliest hate for Jews since the Holocaust? And throughout history, there have been Jewish Americans who gave their lives for the cause of civil rights. Andrew Goodman, Michael Schwerner, as well as James Chaney, when organizing and registering voters in the Mississippi, which was the beating heart of Jim Crow. And those heroes, died so that Black Americans like myself could have the right to vote and live freely, unencumbered by the cruelty of Jim Crow. And so for me, the central lesson learned from history is that we're all in this together. And we all have a moral obligation to fight extremism and racism and anti-Semitism, no matter what form it takes.
Well, we deeply appreciate you, Congressman, and you've achieved the level in the pro-Israel community of like sting or share. If you just say Richie to anyone, they know who you're talking about. You don't have to say anything else. It just they know Richie. So let me
It was an honor to
I'd like to
be.
show you a clip from the.
I just want to say it was an honor just to be part of Wendy's film. The reception has been overwhelming. So just thank you for allowing me to be a part of it.
Okay, thank you. So I want to show you a clip from the film about overseas funding for protests and organizations in the U.S., and then I want to ask you about the clip on the other side. So let's see the clip.
Brian, are we supposed to hear this?
We are supposed to hear this. Yes, Wendy, we are supposed to hear that.
Okay.
While we figure that out, so let me ask you, Congressman, that I was even, I've spent most of my career in this kind of work. Even I was taken aback by the way the film matter of factly has a flow chart of funds from overseas, including Hamas-affiliated organizations, to U.S. student organizations. And my immediate response to the theater is, aren't there laws on the books about this? So what are there laws in the books? Are they being enforced, and what else can be done?
Yes and no. So if an entity is designated as a foreign terrorist organization, then it automatically loses its 501c3 status and therefore loses the taxpayer subsidy for charitable contributions. But if there's a organization that's supporting or a foreign terrorist organization, you can still have a 501c3 status. You can continue to receive charitable contributions that are effectively subsidized by taxpayers. And there's no real effective enforcement mechanism for revoking the 501c3 status of terrorist supporting 501c3s. And that's a problem that we have to address in Congress.
But the film is identifying actual funds coming from abroad to the U.S.
Yeah, no, but those 501c3 organizations can receive funding. I'm assuming they're not. I'm assuming there are intermediaries through which these funds are flowing, and those intermediaries probably have a 501c3 status.
Interesting. So you spoke very movingly just now and in the film, and I'd like to show a clip where you spoke about the history of Jews and the civil rights movement. So let's take a look at that. Maybe we'll have sound, and then we'll talk about it afterwards.
It's not lost on me that throughout history there have been Jews who gave their lives for the cause of civil rights. Andrew Goodman, Michael Schwerner were brutally murdered in the Mississippi burning so that Black Americans could vote and live freely, unencumbered by the cruelty of Jim Crow. And so for me, the lesson learned from history is that we're all in this together. We all have a moral obligation to fight extremism, hate, and fear, no matter what form it takes. And that obligation is based not only on the particularity of our identity, it's based on something more universal, which is our common humanity. And for me, October 7th was so barbaric that it was a frontal assault on our common humanity. College campuses and in social media platforms are indoctrinating young Americans with a hatred for Israel that is so visceral and so fanatical that it renders them indifferent to the butchering of Israeli babies, to the cold-blooded murder of Israeli children and civilians. And so if we, as a society, cannot bring ourselves to condemn the cold-blooded murder of children and civilians with moral clarity, then we should ask ourselves, what are we becoming as a society? This is not only about Israel, and this is not only about the Jewish community. What is at stake is the soul of America.
So that's an incredibly powerful statement and very moving. And you've obviously internalized a lot from what you've learned and known and done, but it feels like we've lost a whole generation. Among young people under 30, under 20, it almost feels like the battle's lost. What do you think we can do to turn this around?
Look, we have no choice but to keep fighting. I've long felt that October 7th did not change the state of anti-Semitism in America. It simply revealed a process that had been unfolding for a long time. But October 7th has been an awakening, both for Jews and allies of the Jewish community. And we've come to realize that we live in a world where we no longer have the luxury of complacency. We have to fight anti-Semitism with the fierce urgency of now. Because what's unique about the moment in which we're living, the difference between now and previous periods of anti-Semitism is social media. Social media enables the virus of anti-Semitism to spread at a pace and on a scale that we've never seen before. And that's a real challenge that we have to confront head on.
So you and your colleagues in Congress have the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act of 2025, which seeks to protect students, individuals from the rise of anti-Semitism. How do you respond to critics who say this could suppress free speech?
I mean, they're wrong. If that were, it is well established in American law that there's a distinction between speech and conduct, right? No one is advocating the criminalization of speech, right? The issue is conduct. There's no First Amendment right to erect illegal encampments or blockade buildings or block students from entering and accessing buildings or breaking windows and doors or holding people hostage or harassing and intimidating Jewish students. Those are not activities protected by the First Amendment. Those are forms of conduct that violate either the rules of a university or the law. And it is fair game to hold universities accountable based on the conduct of their students and faculty and based on the atmosphere of anti-Semitism that results from that conduct. And so I think those, I find that people selectively invoke the First Amendment as a pretext. Imagine for a moment if the KKK were erecting an encampment at Columbia University, the faculty would not be insisting that this is a violation of their First Amendment rights. And so I find that people invoke the First Amendment in a manner that favors their own viewpoints and marginalizes the opposite viewpoint.
So, as you know, Congressman, the Trump administration is going after certain higher institutions under the banner of fighting anti-Semitism, and this is a complicated thing. In the process, there are those people concerned that he's exploiting legitimate concerns of the Jewish community. What are your thoughts about this?
So I'm somewhere in between. There are those who have been condemning every deportation that Trump has undertaken, and there are those who favor every deportation. I approach it on a case-by-case basis. So if you have a student like Mahmoud Khalil, who did engage in actual conduct that violates criminal and immigration law, like he was part of the takeover of a building at Barnard College, those are fair grounds for deportation. They just are. At the same time, if you have a student who simply wrote an op-ed, that to me is insufficient grounds for deportation. So it's speech versus conduct. In my view, the First Amendment prohibits deportation on the basis of speech, but it allows deportation in the event of violating immigration law or criminal law. And that's the distinction that I draw when thinking about these cases. Because the reason I think we have to tread carefully, right? If you accept the premise, and not everyone's going to agree with me, but if you accept the premise that a pro-Israel president can deport an anti-Israel agitator on the basis of speech, what is to prevent an anti-Israel president from deporting pro-Israel students or pro-Israel non-citizens on the basis of speech? And so I'm thinking not only about individual cases, but about the precedent and principles that we're setting and that will govern the future.
Thank you. So I'd like to show you a clip about DEI and then discuss it with you.
DEI, like a lot of things, it started off with the right intentions, and we've made tremendous progress, and that's something we should celebrate. The issue is that we've created this orthodoxy that's unhealthy, where we've decided there are oppressors and oppressed. There's not a lot of nuance here.
We stand here on the side of Palestine because that is the side of the oppressed.
The fastest way to identify an oppressor is basically kind of pale and male and wealth. People have assigned this kind of white, rich oppressiveness to Jews in Israel. And this got so kind of overdone that I think the snake started eating its own tail, and you've ended up with racism itself.
So, Congressman, how can those of us that are Democrats and progressives do support the goals of diversity and inclusion? How can we see that continue to be worked on while at the same time preventing it from boomeranging on us as Jews and as supporters of Israel?
I'm saying for some reason.
We can hear you and see you.
Yeah. No, there's something wrong with my computer, but okay, great. Look, I mean, I feel we should all remain committed to diversity, but if you have a DEI program that excludes Jews, then that's not inclusion, that's a fraud. That's exclusion pretending to be exclusion. And there should be no tolerance for anti-Semitism, even under the guise of DEI. And, you know, one of my concerns is one of the most powerful ideas on the left is the idea of what you might call intersectionality, which divides the world into two categories: the oppressor versus the oppressed, the powerful versus the powerless, white versus black. And there are those on the far left who insist that Jews are the oppressor, Israel is the oppressor that can do no right, and Hamas is the oppressed that can do no wrong. And that's the simplistic, distorting lens through which events like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict are seen. And it creates more moral confusion than clarity. I spoke to a professor of psychology at Fordham University who said that he's been experiencing anti-Semitism from the American Psychological Association, whose leadership told him that Jews are in a privileged class. Like psychologists are saying this. Jews are a privileged class. So there should be zero tolerance for that kind of anti-Semitism, even if you disguise it under DEI.
So DMFI's mission is to strengthen support for Israel within the Democratic Party, in addition to getting Democrats elected. And I think it's safe to say the job has gotten a little harder since October 7th. What's your advice to all the activists watching now about what they can do both locally and nationally to strengthen support for Israel in the party? Are you back in committee?
The Capitol Police. There are many interruptions here in Congress. So the Capitol Police just came to my office. I did nothing wrong. Don't worry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would just tell people to remain engaged. Look, there were many in the Jewish community who felt the shock of feeling alone after October 7th. And I think the lesson from October 7th is that the fight against anti-Semitism never ends, that we cannot prematurely declare mission accomplished. We cannot lull ourselves into a false sense of security or become complacent. We have to fight anti-Semitism with vigilance. And if those in the Jewish community, do not stand up and speak out against anti-Semitism, then no one else will. And the stakes are high, and we're playing catch up. And we've seen the danger of just taking for granted progress, and we're coming to realize that progress is much more reversible, much more fragile than we think, unless we fight for it, because it's not going to fight for itself. So I encourage people to just remain engaged, hold your elected officials accountable. You are more powerful than you realize. And I feel like the strength of the Jewish community is not so much in its numbers, it's in its engagement, its civic engagement. I think that's the power of the Jewish community.
Thank you. How do you engage with Democratic colleagues who hold anti-Israel views or have very strongly negative outlook?
Look, I mean, I have a rule that I never reason with people who refuse to be reasoned with, or, I see no point in placating the implacable. I mean, if you are convinced that Israel's committing genocide, you and I speak a language that's so different, there's no hope for rational discourse. So when it comes to persuadable progressives, I'm willing to engage with them. When it comes to the extremes, I'm not interested in debating them. I'm interested in defeating them so that none of them hold elected office. But when it comes to the persuadable, those who are genuinely open-minded, I tell them, before you rush to judgment about Israel, you should actually go there and experience the country firsthand and speak to both Israelis and Palestinians, speak to both Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs. Go to a place like Sderot, see the facts on the ground with your own eyes. And I guarantee you, if you have an open heart and an open mind, you're going to come to a view of Israel that's far more complex than the caricature that often percolates on social media platforms and on college campuses. So I have found direct experience with Israel to be the best form of education.
I also want to ask you about something we've heard recently is we've had some members say to us, "Oh, I'd love to sign that letter, but my staff will revolt. My staff will kill me." And this is something I have, I've been doing this work on and off for a long time. I haven't heard this before, where staff are actually pushing a member in a direction. Are you sensing that or hearing that from colleagues?
Oh, no question. I feel like there are, and I can only speak to the Democratic side, but I suspect the Republican side has similar dynamics on other issues. But I mean, I see two problems. First is fear, but the second is ideological capture. That there are congressional offices where the staff is considerably to the left and more ideological than the member, and it produces much more anti-Israel policymaking or mixed messaging. And we saw that in the Biden administration, where President Biden would signal to the world that he was a Zionist in his kushkas, but then staffers would send a different message. And so I feel like the mixed messaging is the result of ideological capture. And the pro-Israel community not only needs elected officials, but it also needs a pipeline of staffers.
That's something we're very concerned about because there's a whole other fresh crop of seniors that are about to graduate and head to the Hill. So we're actually looking at ways to begin training staff on campuses to try to improve that.
Like I would recommend an internship program, a fellowship program. Staff is enormously powerful in DC. There are members who let their staff do their thinking for them. I am not one of them, but there are certainly those members.
Let me ask Wendy, I want to ask you a closing question. What's next for you?
Thank you for that question. First of all, just Richie, you are so incredible, not just in your leadership on this issue and in your moral clarity and in your conviction. But I've said this to you in person when I've seen you, but I've done 36 more screenings across the world with this film. And every single time I tee up the film and I open up the film and I say the first person I reached out to book for this film was Congressman Ritchie Torres, the audience explodes with applause. Everyone knows your name from here to Mexico City to Sydney, Australia. You are just a bright light in the darkness, and I know that you're getting the love, and you know this, but I just can't. I just need to share with you. I mean, people lose their minds when I say your name. Truly, you are like just absolutely incredible. The next project that I'm working on actually dovetails perfectly. It's like a part 2 to this, and actually, Richie was sort of talking about it with academia. It's called Poison Ivy, and it's going to be how we got to where we are on college campuses, not just universities and definitely not just the Ivy League, but also K through 12 and what Richie was just talking about with talking to the psychologist or the person who's in the psychology department at the university. I forgot which university he mentioned in New York. That's a big part. What's happening in academia, what's happening in social work, what's happening in psychology departments, and all of the humanities, to be honest. But there's something really incredibly alarming that's happening in medicine, and how Jews, and not just psychology departments, but the way that Jews are being positioned as this oppressor is bizarre. Not just in the humanities at Columbia University, but in medical schools at Tufts. I mean, I just was hearing about that a few nights ago when we were screening at the Angelica in the city, in New York City. So I'm going to dig into that. We're going to look into Qatari funding. We're looking into Saudi funding. We're looking at what's happening with all of the foreign funding that's been coming to university campuses and the impact that that's had. But we're also trickling it down to K through 12 because it's happening in New York City public schools, as the congressman I'm sure knows very well. It's happening in Los Angeles public schools and across the country with this idea of not just DEI, but sort of how they're teaching civics. And it's pretty disturbing. And I do think that the Jewish community has been asleep at the wheel for a long time. To what the congressman said before, we're sort of all have woken up. It had been percolating. Then we saw the explosion. Now we're awake to it. And I think that we can't be asleep at the wheel. So that's the next project. And we're going to start filming it this summer. And I'm sure I'm going to be coming back to you, Richie, if you'll do a follow-up interview for the part 2. I will tell you, this film, whenever I mention it to audiences, people are also applauding. I think that there's a thirst for this idea of how did we get here, right? The first idea of October 8th is how did we get to this moment where Hamas is being celebrated as freedom fighters instead of being condemned as terrorists? Poison ivy is how did we reach this place in academia where, you know, all of these other, this ideology has taken hold and has just framed Jews and Israel as the oppressor and that they can, you know, do no right.
Thank you, Wendy. We'll be watching. So, Congressman, I want to give you the last word. Do you have any final thoughts for us on either how we can best strengthen support for Israel or fight anti-Semitism or operate in this Trump era?
I mean, we should keep fighting. I feel like those of us who are liberal Zionists are the best hope for our civilization. I mean, we're the few factions in American politics who are willing to reject the extremes on both sides. You know, there are those on the far left who only speak out against the far right, and there are those on the far right who only speak out against the far left. I think the people on this call and DMFI and Wendy, we all have the intellectual integrity to stand up to the extremes on both sides. So I feel like we're the best hope for sustaining not only the U.S.-Israel relationship, but Western civilization and the values that we hold dear.
Remarkable. We'll all be watching your career and what you're accomplishing. And thank you so much for all your support and all you do. May you go from strength to strength. And now I'd like to turn it over to DMFI's fabulous board co-chair, Ann Lewis.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Wendy, for that important film. Thank you, Congressman Ritchie Torres, for your leadership and your moral clarity every day. And thanks to all who joined us tonight. You know, I learned so much, I'm sure you did, about the explosion of anti-Semitism on college campuses and across America on October 8th, 7th, 8th. It isn't easy to hear, but we need to know because knowledge makes action possible. And for the past 6 years, DMFI has taken action, bringing voice, strength, advocacy, and action to advance, support the U.S.-Israel relationship. In states across the country, at the highest levels of the Democratic Party, when anti-Israel amendments or platforms threaten to divide us, DMFI has rallied supporters, educated public officials, and engaged local leaders. We know that supporting the U.S.-Israel alliance, which is rooted in shared values and America's national interest, is both good policy and wise political strategy. That work could not be more important, and we couldn't do it without you. So please sign up if you're not already in touch with us. Find us on social media, on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Instagram. Go to our website, Dem Majority, DEM Majority for Israel.org. Sign up for our action alerts. As Congressman Torres said, keep fighting. And if you'd like to donate to help support our vital work and future events like this one, please scan the QR code and come back to the website. We need you. We want to work with you. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you, all of you. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you, Congressman.